You're listening to the Change Management Review podcast, where we bring you the best tactics, strategies, and actionable insights for organization change. We talk with impactful organizational change practitioners and leaders. And now your host, Theresa Moulton.
Welcome to the Change Management Review podcast. My name is Theresa Moulton, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Change Management Review. And my guest today is Travis Hahler. Travis is the Senior Director of Global Strategy and Transformation at Salesforce and the founder of the Neurological Nomad. Over the past 15 years, he has guided more than 100 companies through transformation, including change leadership roles at Google and Salesforce. His path there was unusual. He conducted EEG research in Denmark. He studied neuropsychology at Harvard, and then he earned an MBA, which means he can explain both why your transformation fails and what it costs you. His keynote, The Neuroscience of Change, has reached more than 25,000 leaders across 150 events worldwide. His book, Rethink Resistance, Embracing Neuroscience to Lead Transformational Change, was published by Fast Company Press on June 23, 2026, where it hit #1 on Amazon. Its argument is simple and, I think, genuinely uncomfortable. Resistance isn't a character flaw or a leadership failure, it's biology. Travis, welcome.
Thank you so much, Theresa. I'm so glad to be here with you.
Oh, we're psyched to have you here, Travis. And as I was reading your book and through our initial conversation, I came up with a question for you around your first 10 years, feeling like an imposter in the change management field. And what were you seeing that the change curve and stakeholder matrix crowd wasn't?
Oh, it's a great question. I reflect on that 10 years often now. But really for me, it was this difference between looking at change as a checklist and
Yes.
looking at it as people. And I think my background in neuroscience and psychology and human behavior led me down I'm thinking about people and about what they're going through, and I'm empathetically putting myself in their shoes, and that's what's driving me through the change process. Whereas other people were like, okay, now we have this change impact. We need to solve that with a training, a communication, and it was like everything was kind of a checklist style look.
Right.
And that wasn't the way that I naturally was going towards the change management of the changes. And so that was how I was approaching it a little bit differently.
Yeah. And you also had mentioned in our chat before this that your book and the body of knowledge that you created around resistance really kind of provides the data, the foundation, and the science for why these tools that you were thinking about 10 years ago and how you were using them, why they actually work.
Yeah, absolutely. And so going down that path of the empathy and understanding human behavior and all of that kind of led to that place of, oh, interesting. When I start talking about change in this way to leaders or to organizations, there's a different engagement that I was getting from them around they were really understanding when I would say something like, oh, this team, the reason they're going to resist is because, and then I would name, competence or the relationships that they have built through this. And we're kind of taking some of that away and we
Yeah.
need to rebuild that. Their willingness to engage with that and their willingness to make space for that in their organizational plan was far greater than when we just said, like, we've got to do more training for that group.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, okay, well, there was this why behind it that we weren't getting to, that naturally the neuroscience and the human behavior pieces lended to very well. And it was easy for people to see it and understand it and be open to it.
Yeah. And in your book, you talk about resistance is information and it breaks down. So when is resistance just resistance?
There are different types of resistance. I talk most often about natural resistance and the way that
Mm,
we just as humans work. And that's kind of the biology piece of it, which there's just natural barriers to change that we as humans have within us. And knowing that's important. But there's also levels of resistance that are choices that people make, right?
Yeah.
They've seen all the things, they've understood what it means, they've done the trainings, and they're choosing not to move forward. And those are important too, because that's really a check engine light around what's going on there. Like why are they dug in not wanting to change? And I think a lot of leaders, a lot of people have been taught that that's a battle, right? Like we have to go to
Yeah.
battle with that person because they're a resistor and like we're trying to get everyone to move forward. And really, if you think about it as information, going and having that conversation with that individual to say, I understand that this isn't what you're wanting or wanting to change, but can you tell me why? Like, I just really want
Mm.
to understand. Is there something we're missing? Because here's what we're seeing, but I'm
Hmm.
hearing something different from you. And usually what comes out of those conversations is a lot of really great information. And
Yes.
there's probably a lot of people that are feeling this similar way, but maybe not voicing it. And
Right.
so I always talk about, someone who's resistant vocally and outwardly, who's made a choice to resist something. It's quite a brave position to be in. And it takes a lot of courage to do that, even though we lump them into a problem most often as organizations. But it's really a courageous moment. And so we should honor that and we should, engage and dig in.
Yeah, I agree. And in some of the AI research that I've been doing, it's really been advising change practitioners and executives to see fear as data.
Absolutely. Fear is a natural part of change. And
Hmm.
in the book I talk about loss and fear of
Mm.
loss. And you know, all change is loss. And that's, I
Yes.
think, the piece that we always forget is like, well, this should be an easier way of doing something. AI is a great example of that, right? Where everyone's like, well, it
Hmm.
should make your job so much easier. It should be your
Right.
companion that automates things and that you don't have to write those emails. But it's still loss because you're like,
Yes.
I'm giving up a part of either my competence or my role or my
Yes.
control to something else. And,
Yes.
what does that mean for me? And so that fear is really, really an important thing to acknowledge as change practitioners, as leaders, as organizations, because it exists.
Yes, I agree. And in talking to change professionals quite frequently, they're finding that most of their organizations really are in this culture of fear, caused by this existential fear of losing their job. And you and I had spoken about how companies are rolling AI out as a tool, and they're measuring it, but they're not really giving anyone any guidance on how to use it, or any flavor of what it means. So how does resistance show up in that situation, and how would you advise change practitioners to work with it?
Yeah, and the analogy that I've used most often is that of get handing over bank account information and your PIN number, right? Someone asks
Mhm.
you for that, your initial response is, well, of course not. Like,
No way.
why would I ever do that, right? You're
Right,
giving up something that has a lot of power, which is,
right.
exactly what AI is doing in this moment when you bring it in as a tool. And the reality of that situation, though, that most of us don't see when I would ask
Hmm.
you for your bank account information, your PIN number, you only see probably the one path, which is you're trying to take my money, right? Like you're trying to
Right,
get into my bank
right.
account. The other path, though, is that I could give you money, and that's the only way for me to put something into your bank account. So there's actually a win and a lose fork there. But we naturally deviate towards the loss because that's the part that we're
Right,
concerned about and we're protecting
right.
ourselves. So AI is doing the same thing. We're protecting ourselves when AI comes in because you read all the headlines that say another layoff, associated with
Yeah.
AI, how AI is taking away jobs, how AI is replacing roles. All of that's all over the headlines. And quite frankly, it's great clickbait, right? People click that and they
Right.
read it. Sometimes you get into
Yes.
the article and you're like, it's actually not even really what the article's about, but it got people to read
Right.
it, right? But when, as change practitioners, we're looking at it, we can't look at it as a tool. we have to look at it as a behavioral shift and a cultural shift because it truly is a different way of behaving and a different culture within an organization that you're bringing AI into. And leveraging AI has to become something that we're giving the same amount of dedicated time and effort to as we would a behavioral and cultural shift, not what we would for a tool, right? Tools come in and
Yes.
we say, here's your quick reference guide and here's, the how-to manual. That's
Right.
how we bring tools in. It's a use it
Right.
as you want, here's the simple usage. We
Yes.
don't do that for behavior and cultural change. We create massive plans and strategies and ways to help and ways to reinforce and ways to prioritize that as a part of that transformation. And AI needs that level of consideration.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I really feel for our colleagues because it's such a big, issue. It's just so out there and so I don't want to say comprehensive. I'm trying to say ominous. It's so ominous. I mean, it's just
Just say
out
it,
there.
Teresa. It's ominous. It is. It
It's
is.
ominous. And, here you are, a practitioner, and you're trying to, you know, deal with this wave of emotion and psychology that isn't supported by the sponsors.
Yeah.
And how are you supposed to like evolve and shape that while you're trying to do your change management work because it's like a tsunami.
It is. Well, and then add on top of that, Teresa, that we're not just bringing in AI to everyone else, right?
Right.
We're also having to bring AI into us and
Right.
change and how we do change
Exactly.
work. And so this is very complex in terms of how we're having to address it because it's not only us helping other people adopt it, it's us figuring out, okay, what are the areas of change work that also AI enables and
Yes.
leverages? And how do we reinvent what it is that we
Yes.
do and the ways that we do it so that we're also, a part of this transformation and we're not getting left behind either, in that.
Exactly. I know when I first started out in college, I was in electrical engineering, and the thing that I remember the most is physics, where you're talking about the theory of relativity. And it's like, is this airplane moving relative to the ground, or is the person sitting in the airplane moving relative to the ground? And that's kind of how I feel with what you just said. It's like we're helping the plane or helping the organization move relative to the ground, but then we're in relative to the plane. And so inside ourselves, we're dealing with the same professional identity crisis of who are we as change professionals and how do we serve in our own work as we facilitate this change in the organization that's going through this at a mass level. It's daunting.
It is daunting. And you talk about fear and we talked about loss. There's a lot of change practitioners who are looking at this and, you know, have probably made a lot of their day-to-day work elements of things that AI can do very quickly and very well. And so
Yes.
there's this loss that exists within our own profession where,
Yes.
if what you've done all day is the checklist version of change management,
Yes.
the checklist version of change management is very well done by AI, actually, if you give it the
Yes.
right data. Um,
Yes.
so how do we evolve then as practitioners, and how does that evolve? And I think, you've talked about it before, Teresa, but that evolution of becoming strategic advisors and truly helping to create the strategy of change, not just execute the check the box moments of change. I
Yes.
think that's where the profession is moving. And then the beautiful
Yes.
thing is that's an extremely valuable and extremely unreplaceable piece of change that AI can't do, right? Or at least not yet. But for now, it
Yeah.
cannot do that. And so I think it's an incredibly valuable and powerful thing that we can bring to our organizations.
Yeah. And, also, I see it as our burning platform. AI is almost our
Absolutely.
professional burning platform to get us over our own resistance to become the better professional that we can be. Um, but as we've been talking about resistance, and in your book, you've said that telling a team to just play with it is the most expensive sentence in an AI strategy. What does the brain do differently when the change is AI rather than a reorg or a system integration?
It's a great question, and I do fully believe that that is a very, very expensive sentence. And for me, it's not necessarily that there's something different that happens in the brain, but I think we have to acknowledge what we're asking and also how it flies in the face of what our brains need. And that
Yes,
is, and we kind of talked a little bit about this before, Teresa, but it really is around change, and the barriers to change are certain things. One, it's repetition. It's, what we need, repetition. It's our ability to learn. It's, that time and pacing. It's things like exclusion. Well, the way that we're bringing AI in, if we're thinking about it as a, here you go, just play with it, it's an individual thing. When
yeah,
you make any change or transformation fully on the individual, you immediately throw up certain barriers that are not going to help with that adoption or with that
right.
transformation. And the first one is exclusion. By making it a
Yeah,
singular person's role to transform and use and play and adopt, you have now
interesting.
excluded them from the group narrative. And that is a
Interesting.
huge barrier to change and to transforming because we as humans desire inclusion. So
Interesting.
so you're kind of putting them on their own island. And I think change practitioners feel this often, right? Because we sometimes
Yes.
are our own island of change. But
Yes.
that's exactly what it's doing to a singular person. And then it's fully on them. It's on them to figure out what it means for them, how it brings value, how they show the value it brings, how they, navigate this balance between the fear they have that they're hearing from the external and kind of existential to what they're being told that and being measured on in their companies. That's a lot for one person
Mm,
singularly to manage. And so you immediately take it out of that inclusive group culture where there's support and there's
mm,
ways that we can move together. And I think that's the
mm.
biggest barrier that it throws up for individuals. There's a lot more, obviously, that happens in the brain in those moments, but that's the one I see most. And I
Mm.
think we've seen that as change practitioners a lot, where the group moving towards something is far more powerful than a singular person moving towards something.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, can that put somebody in a survival position where the amygdala hijack actually kicks in?
Absolutely. Yes. That is exactly
Yeah.
what will likely happen because that level, there's a stress level
Yeah.
that is inching up, right? And
Hmm.
especially when you put that much pressure on a singular individual, you're continuing to push that stress level up and up and up until the amygdala gets overwhelmed by this thing
Yeah.
and has to kind of take that break and say, where are we? What's safe? What's not safe? How do we move forward from this? And
Yes.
in those moments, we can't move forward until we've made that decision or made that differentiation of is this safe or is this not safe?
I love the way you're able to put yourself into people's shoes and really, you know, personify what it feels like uh to be in the group or not belong to the group or be on your own and talk about the um way the psychological elements emotional elements of actually being human going through change. I just noticed that in the way that you've been having this conversation. And um it's really interesting because you're not talking about theory, you're embodying it from the human perspective. And what that does for me is it actually shifted me in terms of the way I'm asking questions. And one of the things that has come coming back to is this loss, this concept of loss. And I'm wondering what you think of the loss that leaders are least willing to name right now.
Ooh. The loss that leaders are least willing to name right now. You know, I think what's happening a lot and that we're not naming is loss of control. Um,
Yes.
and so and I talk about this in the book, and there's a lot of different types of loss, but in the book I talk
Yes.
about three main ones, and it's a loss of relationships, a loss of control, and a loss of
Yes.
competence. And those are the three main work-related losses that we experience as people. And
Yeah.
so in this moment and kind of where we are in the AI transformation, the way companies are evolving so quickly and so fast, there's been a lot of loss of control that I don't think
Yes.
people are saying, but they're
Right.
certainly feeling it. And I think that's showing up in the way that, I talk to a lot of leaders and they say when I ask how things are going or what
Yeah.
are you working on? And the difference from what it used to be to now was it used to be here's kind of what we're focused on and here's like, they give me kind of a roadmap style response.
Yep.
Today, the response I hear and I'm feeling is there's just a lot going on. We're tackling this. Like right now, we're focused on that. Like it's a very in the moment response. And that
Yes.
tells me that there's not a feeling of control over their role and the work at a long term. They're seeing it as like
Yes.
short term sprints. And I think
Yes.
that's weighing a lot on leaders and a lot on people.
It's interesting because the Center of Creative Leadership has put out a report, which you're probably familiar with, but one of the concepts in it that stuck for me is around this shift that leaders need to make from being on the pedestal to being with the people and becoming a learning leader.
Mm.
And so it is messy and getting into the mess where you don't have the answers. And the way you were just describing how people were responding to your question of how's it going, um, how are you experiencing their response in terms of their kind of emotional ability to cope with the amount of fear and ambiguity in leading in this chaos?
Well, I think there's there's two sides to that. One is the folks that I'm working with on programs, and the other one is just people I know in general and
Yeah.
having, the coffee chats.
Yeah.
Um, but for me, it kind of comes down to helping them name it. And there's power in
Okay.
language and there's power in
That's a great point.
naming something. And you know, talking to folks and when you hear that and you're kind of in my mind, I'm going, wow, it feels like you don't feel in control of the ship right now. And saying like, do you feel like there's direction that you have in this moment, or do you feel like you're just kind of executing work as it's coming at you? And I hear a lot of folks kind of validating, yeah, it feels like a lot of work just coming at us that we're
Yeah.
trying to just stay above water. And then the next part of that is that must be really hard because I know that you're someone that kind of likes to plan and that kind of
Yeah.
control around that. Yeah, and then you kind of get that response like, yeah, you're right, I do. And then you can kind of have a conversation around like, how do we make this feel more like that? So
Yeah.
maybe we don't really have the 12-month viewpoint that we used to have, but maybe we have a 3 month that we can actually anchor
Yeah.
in some main things. Like how do we create clarity in maybe the roles and responsibilities to help you see that clearly, help your team see that clearly, and then we know kind of where it is that you're playing and how we can support that. And so putting a name to it is really powerful in these moments.
That was beautiful. That was more than putting a name to it. You carved out a space. You helped them carve out a space for it as well. And naming it and then kind of acknowledging it and then what can you do about it? And that was really, really, I mean, people who are listening to this really need to take like rewind and listen to that, because that is a technique that I think is so valuable for us to be able to do, especially with executives today, because they are just getting pummeled. um, I loved that.
Well,
um,
it's a side of the psychology piece too. That like I
yes.
mean, what I just described as a psychological tactic around
Yes.
naming something and helping someone acknowledge their own, where they
Yes.
are. And we joke, I think, as change practitioners that it's part execution and part psychologist couch, right?
Yes, that's
But
right.
sometimes we really do need to lean into that psychologist couch side of the thing where
Yes.
we do need to help people psychologically through some of this to become our partners in helping make it successful.
Right, because then we're really helping build the resilience
Hmm.
in the organization.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So, last question. You've been called the resistance fortune teller. Where do you see change efforts failing before anyone else does?
And the background story of this is always funny to me because I would have never said this about myself. And I think you and I, when we were just kind of debriefing around like, what the work has been and kind of our journeys and really kind of connecting on that level. One of the things that I mentioned was leaning into that human side of, what people are going through and really that empathy of what it means for the person on the other side of the change. And what's interesting about that is the neuroscience of it. And so when I was anchoring in that neuroscience, what becomes clear very quickly once you know it is where people start to fit
Yeah,
into their own neurological barriers. And
right.
so with that, what I've been bringing from that perspective was I would pair these barriers with what people are experiencing and how that shows up in our plan. So,
Yeah.
so kind of where that all came from was a large scale initiative that we were doing with a systems implementation. And we were sitting down and when I was briefing before a town hall and I was
Uh-huh.
talking to a CHRO and what I was saying was, okay, here's our audience. Let me break down our audience into different groups. And one of the particular groups that was highly impacted was finance. And I was saying, okay, so from a finance perspective, here's what you need to keep in mind. Their first question is going to be, how are we going to learn this system in the way that we do today? Because this
Mm-hmm.
system that we're shifting to changes pretty much everything about how they've done their job for 15 years, right?
Mm.
So their level of competence is threatened. So you're immediately going to get that pushback. And so we were
Yep.
talking in that way as someone briefing someone else for a conversation. And after that, and that's exactly what happened. After that, they came back into the room. They're like, God, it's like you could just see it and pick it out. And what I said back was, you know, it's not fair, which is why I love the fortune teller analogy, is because it's like the fortune teller knows a little bit more behind the scenes than they're letting on, right? They're making it seem like
Yes.
the cards are the crystal ball is what's telling them the thing. They always have a little bit extra that they're not letting you see, right? And that was the
Right.
neuroscience for me. I was like, well, it's not really fair. I understand how the neuroscience and the neurobiology works of humans. And so I'm coming
Right.
to you with that perspective and you're seeing magic and I'm seeing like logical things that are going to happen. So, um,
Right.
anyway, but that's kind of how that came about. But really what it means for me is that I'm able to articulate those barriers as a predictive so that we can plan for them rather
That's right.
than I think a lot of folks see it after the fact where you go into the town hall, you come out and you're like, oh gosh, how do we answer these questions that they had about the competence and all of these things? How do they learn and that? Whereas I'm helping to pick that out and say, we should come with a response about how the training is going to happen and the fact that we've
Yeah.
already partnered with third party X to come in and
Right.
do a boot camp on this new system and we're going to give them
Mm-hmm.
X amount of time. Like we should just have that in our back pocket ready to respond to that. And that's the difference.
Yeah. And again, just for me personally, and I've just met you, it's incredible how you put yourself into the stakeholders. You embody the stakeholder. I mean, it's really a skill set. I love it.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you, Teresa.
You're welcome. It's amazing to experience it, honestly. It's really cool. So we're about out of time, and I wanted to ask you if there's one thing that you would like to leave change professionals with as a thought, what that might be.
Right now, I think change is having a moment and we can kind of either lean into it or not. And
Hmm.
I would encourage us all to lean into it because helping with this transformational moment of how our companies are evolving, our cultures are evolving, our people are evolving in the way that they work with AI and everything else, it's also a great opportunity to help show the value of the work that we do.
Yes.
And I think we all joke, and we've joked even, Theresa, about if we do our job really well, no one knows we exist. But I would
Right.
really challenge other practitioners to start saying, what is it that we're doing in those moments to help highlight the value that this is bringing, and help highlight how we're navigating some of these difficult moments, so that we don't let this moment go with people thinking that it just went really well. It wasn't a problem at all. The reality is that these teams, these people have been behind the scenes killing themselves to try to make this a great thing. Let's not
Right.
lose that moment of the importance of our profession and the importance of the work that we do and how it does help people at the end of the day. Because that's our whole job, is helping people.
That's fantastic. I love that. Thank you. So I want to just remind people that Travis has published a book, and it came out this June, called Rethink Resistance, Embracing Neuroscience to Lead Transformational Change. And it is on the market. So definitely check it out. And Travis, how would people get a hold of you if they want to continue the conversation?
Yes, please do. So LinkedIn, Travis Hahler on LinkedIn. You can go to my website. It's travishahler.com. There's more information about what I do, my book. There's links to podcasts like this and other thought leadership. But yeah, please connect with me. I read all my own messages. I'd love to hear from you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Change Management Review podcast. To get alerts for new episodes, be sure to follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our weekly newsletter, or subscribe to follow on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you find great podcasts.